What's up, sports fans? This is the Lucas Ross Sports Channel. We continue with our 2025 college football schedule preview and very early projected record series. The North Carolina Tar Heels are up next. Before we look ahead to 2025, let's take a look back at what North Carolina did in 2024. Here are my projections and predictions last year for North Carolina. My projection for this team was at 9-3, and then my prediction for them was also 9-3. So, as you could probably tell by that projection and prediction last year for 2024, I was very high on the Tar Heels. I kind of expected this team to be like, not a top contender in the ACC, but at least be a dark horse team in the ACC as well. So yeah, I was pretty high on them, but they did not live up to the expectations that I was hoping for. It was kind of a disappointing year for North Carolina. I know they made it to a bowl game, but I think a lot of people were kind of expecting North Carolina to do a lot better than that 6-6 record, and that's what they did last year. They went 6-6 in the regular season, and then the overall record for this team in 2024 was 6-7 if you count their bowl game loss at the end of the year. So yeah, kind of a disappointing year for North Carolina. They still made it to a bowl game, but you know, it's kind of a disappointing year. You look at the schedule from last year in 2024. First off, in the non-conference, they have to play Minnesota out of the Big Ten on the road. They ended up beating Minnesota by 2. That was kind of an ugly game there. They only beat them like 19-17. Of course, North Carolina's offense wasn't as good as it was, in the last couple years, in 23 and 22. Yeah, they had a different quarterback, so that's the reason why North Carolina, I think, struggled in that game. Then they had Charlotte, NC Central, took care of business in both of those games. But then they had James Madison out of the group of 5, and they scored 70 points on this North Carolina team. That was definitely a bad game there for the North Carolina defense. That was a shootout there against James Madison. That final score of that game was like 70-50. And yeah, I have never seen a group of 5 team score that amount of points against a Power 4 team. So yeah, that was just kind of a crazy game there for North Carolina. But then you look at their conference schedule. We'll start with their home games in the ACC. They played Pittsburgh, Georgia Tech, Wake Forest, and NC State, all at home last year in the ACC. So they lost to Pittsburgh, Georgia Tech, and NC State. They only won one home game last year, and that was against Wake Forest. So they struggled big time at home in the ACC. And then they also struggled a little bit on the road. But they played Duke on the road, Virginia on the road, Florida State, and then Boston College. They lost to Duke and Boston College, but they beat Virginia and Florida State. Of course, Florida State ended up not being as good as we thought they were going to be. So yeah, that's a look back at 2024, but 2025 is different. It's a new era for the Tar Heels. Of course, Bill Belichick taking over. We'll see how good this North Carolina team is, and there's a lot of high expectations for this team. But here's a schedule for them in 2025. Before we go game by game, let's take a look at who North Carolina plays in the non-conference this year. So this is their non-conference schedule. They will, of course, play TCU out of the Big 12. That game going to be on Labor Day night, the first game of the Bill Belichick era. Yeah, that's a big game there. I'm not going to lie, it's a pretty big game to kick off the season. I know TCU is not really the best team last year, but this is a big game to kick off the year. I think it's going to be a sellout crowd because it's Bill Belichick's debut, and it's also on a Monday night. So Labor Day games, of course, are usually packed, but it's a home game there for North Carolina. So they'll play the Horned Frogs out of the Big 12 on Labor Day night, September the 1st. Then they play at Charlotte here. So yeah, that's kind of a weird road game there to play on the road at Charlotte. And then they got Richmond, so 2 games that North Carolina should be favored in both of those. And then they also got UCF out of the Big 12, but that one will be on the road. So you look at this non-conference schedule, it's pretty interesting when you got 2 Big 12 teams in there, but a couple of cupcakes that they should be favored in. So it's a little bit of a tough non-conference schedule, but it's not quite as bad as you would think it would be. So that's your non-conference schedule. Let's now move on to the home games in the ACC. North Carolina is going to be playing Clemson, Virginia, Stanford, and Duke, all at home this year in the ACC. So Virginia and Stanford are pretty winnable games. Those 2 games, North Carolina might be, favored in those, which I'll get to in just a moment. And then obviously Duke is a rivalry game. They lost to them last year, so that's a big revenge game coming up there for the Tar Heels. And then obviously Clemson is the big home game. Clemson, obviously, they have a lot of production coming back. I think they have the most production coming back in the country, according to that returning production percentage, and then also in the country as well. So yeah, Clemson and Duke might be your 2 biggest home games here for North Carolina. But yeah, Virginia and Stanford, those are really winnable games here for the Tar Heels. So that's your home schedule. Let's now take a look at their road games in the ACC. They will play on the road at Cal, Syracuse, Wake Forest, and NC State. So this road schedule is a little bit tricky. You got to go out west to play Cal. I mean, it could be a lot worse than that a little bit, but it definitely playing out west and everything, that could be a little bit tricky there for the Tar Heels. Syracuse, always a pretty tough place to play. Wake Forest, that could be a winnable game there for North Carolina. And then obviously you got rival NC State, I should say. And NC State's really owned this rivalry now in the last few years. It might heat up now since Bill Belichick is coming to the Tar Heels. So yeah, I'm really excited for that game there between the Tar Heels and the Wolfpack. But that's your away schedule. It's a little bit tough, but not quite as bad as you think as well, just like the home schedule. Let's go back to the schedule now and go full game by game now for the Tar Heels. Again, they'll kick things off on Labor Day night, September the 1st, against TCU at home, and then they go on the road to play Charlotte on September 6th. Then they got Richmond after that on September 13th. Then UCF also on the road on September 20th. So they play all four of their non-conference teams in the first 4 weeks, and then they get a bye week before playing that big game against Clemson. That is a really good spot for the bye week. You play 4 games, and then they'll get that big test coming up against Clemson on October the 4th. And then they also get another bye week before going out west to Cal on October 18th. That's not a bad spot for a bye week before having to go out west and everything, but either way, that's kind of a weird spot for a bye week. It's not bad, but it's kind of just weird, to be honest. And then after that, it's Virginia at home on October 25th. Then they play their second weeknight game. It will be on a Friday, though. They'll play this one on Halloween on the road at Syracuse, and then they get another bye week. So it looks like they get 2 bye weeks, it looks like, or maybe not. I don't think they get a third bye week or not, but they play Stanford at home on November 8th, and then they got on the road at Wake Forest on November 15th. Then it's Duke at home on November 22nd, and then on the road at NC State to close things out on November 29th. So you got back-to-back rivalry games there with Duke and NC State. They are going to have to at least win one or two of those rivalry games there, or at least win both of them. But, that is your schedule for North Carolina for 2025. It's a little bit of a tough schedule with the non-conference, but you don't have to play Miami, and you also don't have to play Louisville or either Florida State. But, Florida State obviously was a team that you definitely probably want to have on this schedule, even though they were not really good last year. But let's find out and get to the projection for North Carolina. This is the scale I'll be using here for their official projection. Basically, a 1% game in the red, that's pretty much going to be your automatic loss in that percentage. 20% games in the orange, that's basically where North Carolina is going to be like a double-digit underdog. 40% in the yellow, they'll be a clear underdog in that percentage by 6 or 7 points, so by less than a touchdown. And then 50-50 games in the white, those are pretty much games that really can go either way. 60% in the purple, this is where North Carolina will be favored by 6 or 7 points, so by less than a touchdown. And then 80% in the blue, they'll be favored by double digits in that percentage, and then 99% in the green. That's pretty much your automatic wins. So we'll start with those easy wins here for North Carolina. I think you've got a couple of them on this schedule, and they both come in the non-conference. 2 out of those 4 non-conference games. You got Charlotte on the road and then Richmond at home here on September 13th. Yeah, 2 games that North Carolina definitely has no business to lose. I know they lost to, James Madison last year, but these 2 teams are definitely not better than James Madison. And I know Charlotte's on the road. That probably should be in the blue, but look, I don't know how good Charlotte is. I had never heard of them out of the group of 5. I've heard of them some, but when it comes to playing against like Power 4 teams, they haven't been quite that successful. So yeah, Charlotte, they should be able to take care of business. And then Richmond is an FCS team. So yeah, North Carolina will be big favorites in both of those games. They have no business to lose both of those games either way. So yeah, they'll be big favorites. So I think these 2 games are definitely over that 95 to 99% range. And then I got a couple of games in the purple. I don't have any games where they're going to be favored by double digits, but I got a couple of games where I think North Carolina is going to be favored by less than a touchdown, like 6 or 7 points. And they come against Virginia and Stanford on October 25th and November 8th. Both of these games are at home. North Carolina is a much better team than both of these teams. Stanford, don't know how good they're going to be. It's obviously been a rough couple years for them ever since their new coach got there. And then obviously Virginia, I don't really know how good this team is going to be. Last year it seemed like they were heading in the right direction, but they kind of had a disappointing up and down year. So yeah, I don't know how good the Cavaliers are going to be either. So these 2 teams are pretty similar. We don't know how good these teams are going to be. So yeah, Virginia and Stanford, I think think North Carolina will be favored by less than a touchdown, 6 or 7 points. They'll be favored in both of those games by a touchdown. So the reason why they're in the purple is because they're both at home. And then I got one game on here where I think North Carolina is going to be an underdog in. It's not in the red or the orange where they're double-digit underdogs, and then also it's a pretty much an automatic loss. It's in the yellow, and I think North Carolina is going to be a 6 or 7 point underdog, and that comes against Clemson here on October 4th. This is a game that North Carolina has a chance to win in. I'm not saying they're going to lose it. They'll be an underdog, but it's a home game. They get a bye week before playing this game. That does give you an extra time to prepare for this Clemson team. Physical defense, and then also a pretty explosive offense that maybe has found its way with this offensive coordinator. Cade Klubnik is a veteran, experienced quarterback, so that does kind of give you some time to kind of feel information about Cade Klubnik as well. So yeah, Clemson definitely is going to be a pretty tough game, but it's a home game for North Carolina. They definitely have a pretty good shot to win this game. And again, they get that extra time to prepare for this game. They get a bye week before playing this one on October 4th. So yeah, that's really the only game that I can see North Carolina being a clear underdog by 6 or 7 points. And then the rest of these games are pretty much 50-50 games. You got TCU on Labor Day night, UCF just because it's on the road. You got Cal because it's on the road, Syracuse because it's on the road, and same thing with Wake Forest. And then obviously Duke and NC State, those are big rivalry games. They can both go either way. I know Duke beat North Carolina last year. Maybe the Blue Devils are kind of better than the Tar Heels, but because it's at home for North Carolina, that does give them a chance to beat their rivals. And then NC State, I know NC State probably should be favored in this game as well, but I think both of these teams are pretty even. So yeah, 7 total 50-50 games is what we had counted a total of 50-50 games here. So yeah, 7 50-50 games. So what does the projected record look like for North Carolina based on how tough this schedule is? Well, we count those 2 green games as wins, and then you average out the 2 games in the purple at 60%, average out the 1 game in the yellow at 40%, then average out all 7 of these 50-50 games at 50%. Let's say they do this. They have a total of 7 50-50 games. Let's say they win 4 out of the 7, and then they probably slip up in one of those purple games. You lose 3 50-50 games, and then you probably lose to maybe Virginia or Stanford, because we have seen North Carolina, struggle against really average teams in the ACC over the years before Bill Belichick came over. Is that going to happen again this year? I don't really know, but they could probably slip up in one of those purple games. It wouldn't shock me. I mean, it could be against Virginia, it could be against Stanford, but yeah, you got a total of 7 50-50 games, so they win 4 of them and then lose 3 50-50 games, and then one of those purple games. Then obviously you got those 4 50-50 wins, and then plus the green games, and then they'll obviously be underdogs against Clemson. That's going to give you a total of 7 wins there for North Carolina. So that is what the projection is for the Tar Heels. It is 7-5 here for 2025. That's not a bad projection for the Tar Heels based on this schedule. Again, it's not a bad schedule for North Carolina. 6-6 is probably the worst case. If they had Miami on this schedule, it would probably be at 6-6. But if they had probably not Clemson on this schedule, the projection would probably be a lot higher at 8-4. And maybe if they didn't have Duke, which obviously that's not going to change because I think they'd play Duke and NC State every year with all these changes in the ACC still. I think they still play that rivalry every year. So yeah, 7-5 is what the projection looks like here for North Carolina. I think that's a pretty fair projection. Do you guys agree or disagree? And let me know your thoughts about North Carolina down in the comments below. Give me your projection for this team. Thanks for watching this video, and stay tuned for more sports content videos on my Lucas Ross Sports YouTube channel.